Welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast, brought to you by the Amoria Bond Group. In each episode, we feature prominent business leaders and industry experts sharing their personal experiences and inspiring anecdotes of what progression means to them and insights into their specialist fields, as well as tools, techniques, and practical steps we can all take to progress lives everywhere.
Welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast. And today I invited not only a friend, but also an individual who is very well known with progressing lives and with communication styles. And that is Nick Booth. Welcome, Nick, to today's show.
Thanks, Timon.
Nick is the owner of the Seventh Wave, a training company. And you are the owner of this business since 2010, I believe, Nick, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and well, in your career, so your career did not start in 2010, but I believe before that, you've been working with loads of people, and I guess that's also where your interest came from, progressing people's life. So can you talk me through what does progression means to you?
In terms of progression, I think it's giving everybody the opportunity to be the best version of themselves they can be. I think that's number one, because very often we develop a type or a way of communicating that we believe works for us, but we don't always think about what it's like for the recipient. And that kind of communication style, the way we work with each other, ultimately creates relationships. And so when I started my career back I was 21, 22, running a Woolworths store on the high street in Nottingham. And I did that for 6 years. And my style at the time as a leader I had 15 full-time ladies that I managed, all middle-aged ladies. And in essence, they managed me. And that was it. So I did that for 6 years. And you realize you develop a style because you've got no reflective practice at all. And then I moved to macro wholesalers. And when I was working with macro, I worked in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, moved over to Belfast, very, very different cultures. And then ultimately worked in macro Harlesden in London, where I had 600 staff and 80 different cultures. And within that time, you realize how important it is for us to understand each other, to allow you to progress in your environment, to be the best version of you can be. So, and then obviously I then went to work for B&Q, which is all about engagement, which we can talk about later in the podcast, which how important that is, which I think we could loop around to. I did about 8 years with focusing on people engagement within B&Q, and then left to start my own business as a coach and a trainer, a leadership trainer. So so I think in essence, it's about being the best version of you. And I do have a bit of a core principle that in any relationship you have, you've taught that person how to treat you. And I think that is so important for us to kind of always think that. So in any relationship, you've taught that person how to treat you. And that's one of our fundamental beliefs as a company, certainly from myself. And it's about taking responsibility yourself for how you communicate to others. So that's it in a non-nutshell.
Well, that's all right. Thanks for the introduction, Nick, and giving a bit more context about your career so far. You mentioned a few things that piqued my interest, to be honest. And one of the things was you've managed different people out of different backgrounds as well. What was there, or is there somewhere in your career that triggered you of realizing that everyone is different and I need to start communicating differently to those people?
I think absolutely. I think what you've got to do, you've got to tailor your communication to those individuals. So I would say in Woolworths was very young, so I probably can't really, that doesn't work as well as a story for you guys, I don't think. But certainly in macro, it was a wholesale environment. It was huge. Again, 500-600 staff. So the way you communicated, you had a limited window to communicate to your team. And their success within their departments that they ran was ultimately your success, because you couldn't, in Woolworths, you could fill the shelves yourself. You could go around and basically run the shop on your own as long as you had someone on the checkout. When we went to, and that was at 15, so I literally went from managing 15 people to managing nearly 400 people when I ran my smallest store, which was Macro Hull. and you realize that you can't do it all yourself. So what you have to do is max out on that time you have with each individual, and try and understand it. Effectively is emotional intelligence, but you have to learn how to max out on that communication time with those individuals to get the best from it. So, in answer to your question, Timon, what I was doing was focusing, thinking, I've got 2 or 3 minutes with this individual. How can I max out? Was that the best form of communication to that individual? And sometimes it went terribly wrong, and sometimes I kind of got it right. But at the time, I didn't realize why I was getting it right and why I was getting it wrong. But I learned that more when I left B&Q.
Yeah, okay. So it's quite interesting. So do you have an example where maybe your communication went, well, completely wrong, and you realized only afterwards, oh, I should have communicated differently?
I think so. I would say that we used to have probably back office. I suppose more recently, I think it's my accountant. So I've been self-employed and got my business. And I remember the first year, when you wouldn't run a business in the UK, the first year is kind of tax-free because the tax allows you to kind of get going from a cash flow point of view. The second year is when you are taxed on your first year, and you're also predicted tax on your third year. So it's quite a tough time. And I remember my accountant ringing me up, and he said, look, you're going to be taxed. You got VAT, you got income tax and corporation tax. And I was angry at him. I was frustrated. I said, Peter, you should have told me this. And I realized all of that was my fault. And he is a good friend like you, Timon. He's a good friend to me. He looks after me. And I had to apologize to him, because what I was assuming was that he was going to look after me and talk me through the detail. But we'd never had that contract. We'd never agreed that. So how was he to know that? So my assumption was he was going to do that. The reality was I never told him. So he's not a mind reader. And what he doesn't do is wake up in the morning and think about Nick Booth every day, because he's got other businesses he looks after. So consequently, I had to readdress that, go and buy him lunch, apologize for my brusqueness, and explain to him that this is what I need, because my style is one of probably wider thinking as opposed to detail. And if we get to talk about insights later, I'll probably explain that a little more and talk in a bit more detail. But that's where I could have lost a friendship there. But I had to revert pretty quickly, rewind, apologize, take responsibility for that, get back to him and explain to him really what I wanted him to do for me. And then when he got that, he's now absolutely fantastic. So yeah, that's when I got it wrong.
Okay, so you learned it the hard way. So you had to buy him lunch as well.
Yeah, and it was expensive. But anyway.
Yeah. So that's an expensive way of learning how to communicate, for sure. So in your career, you found out that I need to communicate differently to different people. But if I relate it to myself, how do I know, how can I communicate best to an individual? Because I can learn it the hard way, but I can also understand that sometimes it might be difficult for individuals to think about the other person receiving your message.
Yeah, I mean, we use within Seventh Wave, we use a tool called Insights Discovery. It is by far, I believe, the best tool for understanding others. So if I can give you a long answer to your question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go
so
for
I
it,
think the way we look at it is, so it's based around Carl Jung's work in 1965, and he looked about preferences, about how people prefer to be, and he based it on 2 factors. The first factor was how we're energized. So whether you're an introvert or extrovert, or introversion, extroversion. So that was the first factor. The other factor we overlay that is how you make decisions. Is it thinking or feeling? And then when you put those 2 things together, you come up with 4 energies. So an extrovert thinker, so very logical, very driven, very focused, is very red energy. On the opposite side of the wheel, you've got someone, an introverted thinker. That would be someone who could do a vocational role, like a nurse, and they've got green energy or a green preference. Then you've got extroverted feeling, so someone who wears their heart on their sleeve, and that's yellow energy. And then you move over to the introverted thinking, which is someone who's got this cool blue logic, and that's blue energy. So that's where my accountant sits, is in that blue energy. So he's introverted thinking, where I express things quite freely without always filtering my responses. I'm very open and yellow energy. So someone who's very direct, like often a CEO, might have a lot of red energy. And then sometimes a coach or a nurse or a carer could be green energy. So in answer to your question, what I would do, I would just consider, and I think there's two ways of answering this question. Firstly, consider their color energy. But the other way, and think about how they would prefer to be communicated to. But the other way is asking them about them is always the best way. So how are you? How are you doing? And then allowing time for them to answer. Because this is what I think as a generation of leaders, and certainly leaders I've met and spend a lot of time with, they want to give the answer all the time. They think the fastest way to get a result is to give the answer. So in answer to your question, Timon, what I would do, I would ask them questions about themselves. How do they like to go about life and work? And then ask them the why question. And from that, you can probably establish their communication style through an insights filter, is the way I would do it. And understand that.
Yeah.
Understand that.
Yeah, well, I had the privilege to work together with you, Nick, as well on the insights, and I think it was great to realize for myself what my core energy is on communication style, and also for the people that I work with. It's great to know how best to communicate to each other. But when I speak to other people about this, about the communication styles, about the preferences, the different colors, often I get the response, yeah, Timon, that's all great, but aren't we putting those people into a specific corner? And are we not only going to, do you understand what I mean?
I totally understand. I mean, one thing that we express and really focus on is no one is a color. So no one is one color. Everybody is a blend of all four. So I mentioned my accountant, Peter. He's got, he's dominant blue energy, but yet he still does things. He goes sailing with his sons. He does loads of stuff that sometimes surprises me. He's just been on a motorbike tour with some of his friends around Scotland. So he, in that time when he was sitting at night having a beer with him around a fire, he will be what we call dialing up his yellow energy. But also he would like some quiet time. So we've got all four inside us, and it is what you prefer. So it's when you go home from work, do you like to reflect on your day, or do you like to tell others about your day? It's our preference, what we prefer. So that's all it is. It doesn't. So if Peter disappeared off the face of the earth, I could just about. I wouldn't like it, but I could do my own accounts. I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't enjoy it, but I could do it. So it's just what I prefer, and I think that's what's really important. So when we are talking to someone, what we're hearing is preference. What we are not doing is boxing them into a corner. That is the last thing we ever do, because these are all choices, And even though it's quite difficult for some people to dial up their preference sometimes in certain. So, for example, the one that I come across most recently from two CEOs that I'm coaching is the fear of public speaking. So that is lack of yellow energy, and they realize it's something they must do more of. Now, that is a fantastic opportunity, because if we talk about, progressing people's lives, they feel they're limiting their world because they can't public speak. So we've worked on, and I can't say just go and do it, because that's just harsh, and it would be an unfair way of communicating. So what they've done is one of them is taking a public speaking course, and the other one, fascinatingly, is learning to be a stand-up comedian. So he's taken a course in becoming a stand-up comedian. It's a 12-week course, and then COVID restrictions being lifted. On the 12th week, you do a stand-up on a stage and do a set of 20 minutes. And he's doing that to face into his fears because of his lack of yellow energy, in my language. So he's turning that up. He's working on that. So that's it. Yeah. So that's what we can do.
Okay. So what triggered this CEO to follow this course? When did he realize this?
That was from a coaching conversation we had.
Okay, wonderful.
So we get into it, and again, don't forget, all of this is progressing everybody's life. So what we're looking to do is, so the way I do it in my world, I get them to do a SWOT on themselves, their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And it came out in his weaknesses. He said, look, Nick, I'm just not very good on my feet. I just get anxious. I get nervous in more than 3 people. So much bigger question. So when I'm coaching these people, it's about allowing them to feel comfortable and being as open. They feel safe with me. When they feel safe with me, they can be open about what their challenges are. So it's very important that when I contract with them in a coaching environment, we have lots of confidentiality. There's no judgment for me. My empathy is true, and my intent is pure around getting the best from them. And then it allows them then to be a bit courageous and be a bit honest around stuff. So, and then that's where that came out, because he didn't feel threatened in that space.
Yeah, and if I link this to people listening to this podcast, they might be in a managerial role, or they might stepping up into a leadership role. Now you just spoke about if you talk to someone, how is your day or how you're doing, they display often their preferred energy or their preferred communication style. But how can I apply this into my daily work? So I've got, for example, I have a team of 3, 4, 5 people in my team, and how can I then work with these 5 different individuals? Where can I start next to ask them about the day? So can you give me some practical tips that I can apply as a manager, for example?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is, if you're going to be working with these people for a length of time, I will be completely overt, and by that I would mean I would give them an overview of how Insights works. I would have a chat with them about communication styles. I'll chat with them about where they think their preference lies. That's what I'd do at first. That'd be my primary function. The second thing is I'd get a bit of a contracting with them around, it's a safe environment. I won't judge you. Let's all, we have a destination. So, and then I'd say to them, how do you like to, tell me about your day. How do you like to be communicated to? And then allowing that person, because if you think about progressing lives everywhere, one of the biggest things that can stop someone progressing is fear of failure or fear of their boss. And they're normally combined. So if we can take away that fear of failure and allow someone to be a little bit freer in that space, you can really progress lives extremely quickly, because those individuals can become very, very buoyant and very more courageous in their style at work, because they're not fearful of their boss. So that is what I would do. I'd be very, very overt with it. Secondly, I would check in with them on a semi-regular basis every few days. How's it been? Anything more I can do for you? But at the same time, putting rules and kind of rules in place, if you like. So about doing I talk about doing basics brilliantly. So it's about, look, what are we doing to do basics brilliantly? Because you've got to be playing by the same rules, and you've got to be aiming towards the same thing. If you're doing that, then you won't go far wrong as a leader. So that's what I would do. If I had 4 or 5 people, we'd agree the basics, we'd agree the rules, and I would tailor my communication to them. Bearing in mind, I would also consider how what their preferences are more like, and I'd probably do a combination. So it's not a silver bullet, Timon. It's a combination of factors, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. And one thing that I remember from the training sessions that you and I had was that, and you've mentioned this as well earlier on in our conversation, that you teach the person how to treat you. So if I communicate to my wife, or if I communicate to you, I'm actually teaching you how to communicate to me. But how does that work? Can you give me more context around this?
Absolutely. So one of the most fundamental things that we do training is the parent adult child model. So if, for example, got a new starter, and every day that new starter sits on desk, and let's call him Jack, right? And I say, Jack, don't worry about lunch. I'm going to buy you lunch today. And I'm going to tell you what time you can go to the toilet. I'm going to tell you what time you go for a coffee break. I'm going to tell you what time you to leave. Jack will sit there and wait to be told by me. So if I look at, and every day I say, right, okay, start work now, it's 9 a.m. Finish work now, it's 6 p.m. Let's go for lunch at 12, and I'm going to buy you lunch today. And if we did that every day for a week, the following week, I wasn't in. Jack will be lost. He says, okay, I think I need to start work. Where do I go for? I'm not sure what time. Should I go for a break now or not? And straight away, the parenting style, so the parent-child relationship would cause Jack to act in a certain way. So when we start to work those relationships out and go, right, what time we start at 9. It'd be good if you can finish around 6, preferably not before. There's a really nice cafe around the corner that you can go and grab lunch. We do lunch around about 12. And occasionally me and you might grab lunch together. It's a much more of an adult relationship. And I think that's really important for us to establish as when we first get into that relationship. So, and people then respond to that. And if every time I spoke to you as my boss, not that you would do this, Timon, but if every time I spoke to you, criticise me, I would be less reticent to be open to you. So you're teaching me how to hold back some stuff before I share it with you. So all the time I'm conscious about how you're being with me. So I'd adjust my communication style and adjust my openness to you based on your previous responses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite funny. You're touching on a topic that I would like to have another podcast on, which is part of the onboarding process as well. I think onboarding is vital, especially nowadays. It's vital that you put emphasis on a great onboarding. But what you're also saying is that the first communication that you have, maybe with a new starter or a new trainee in your team or a new employee, the first communication is essential. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. That first hour, 2 hours, or whatever, even at interview stage, is so important, because you are basically laying down how you want that relationship to be, how we're going to work together. And they will be measuring you massively in that space. They're like sponges. They simply do not know. No matter how experienced they are, you are like a sponge when you meet someone new. You're soaking up, what is it like? What are they like? How they're being with me? And very often, you know, back in the old red energy recruitment days, you'd get someone waving a Rolex in front of them saying, if you work really hard, do 60 hours a week, you can get a Rolex. And then it was a very crass way of leading. Now we have to be multidimensional as leaders, and we have to understand what their drivers are, what are their motivations, what really gets them out of bed in the morning. And when we can connect with that, then it allows that person to flourish, becomes the best version of themselves they can be, and they allow them to progress their lives. That's what I think that to me is allowing that person to flourish in a safe parameters. It's so important that they have parameters at work and they know what the rules are, you know, and because you have a corporate brand.
Yeah. So how can I, as a leader, create that safe environment? Is there a secret to it?
I would say, one, be confidential. I'd be say also non-judgmental in that space. Don't test them, don't try and catch them out, and be very overt. Fundamentally, they're at the desk in a recruitment world. They are at the desk to do recruiting and to hit budgets, and that's why doing the basics brilliantly. So, I don't know, number of CVs sent out, number of calls made a day. We agree them, and I think it's keep it simple in that space. And we agree the process. We agree what a good day looks like. And then when you've agreed what a good day looks like, and they've failed or they haven't done it, that's when you can have a better conversation with them. And you're not hitting them with a stick. You're going, "Come on then, Jack. What happened yesterday? You know, that's not like you. You know, on the first couple of weeks you were hitting this. Something's changed. Can you help me?" And they're much more likely to be honest with you at that space because you've established this adult relationship. Should I say?
Yeah, and you're focusing it now on specifically on recruitment, but I think you can apply the same tactics to any job, isn't it?
100%. We work at the moment. We're working a lot in the leisure industry as well. So you can imagine with staycation in the UK, you know, you've got these holiday parks that are suddenly full. They've never been full before to this extent. And so, yeah, how do we deal with all these pressure of new customers? And you know, we've never been this busy before. So it's absolutely so that I use recruitment because it's the industry that we both kind of got to know each other in, but it's absolutely applicable in accounting, in running holiday parks, in running a hotel. It doesn't matter. It's applicable to everyone.
Yeah.
You know, be adult, agree the rules, understand them, be open in communication, contract, you know, be true to them as a leader, you know, and having that gorgeous openness.
So, but what I can understand as well is, and you're saying you're the adult relationship that you would like to create. Now I'm going to interview an individual that applied at my job vacancy, and that individual is entering the room. How can I create an adult relationship where I'm also I need to interview this person. I need to interview this individual. I need to know if I would like to work with this individual and vice versa as well. So how can I become that adult, and how can I give the other person the feeling of an adult as well in that interview environment?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, if you start, I always try and start with the end in mind. So the end in mind in any kind of interview environment would be that you have both been as open and as honest as you possibly could have been around the role and about you as a human being, and then you can see if it's a good match. So, but that person won't be as honest as they can possibly be if in that relationship you trust me. So I would that they don't trust you. So I think that trust comes from vulnerability, and I think the vulnerability piece is really important in any relationship, especially when you're interviewing. So they kind of come into the room, you ask them everything's okay. Do you want a coffee or tea? Grab a seat, explain how long you're going to be in there. Just say, look, the outcome of this meeting would be great if we could really get to know each other to see if this is a good match. And what would be ideal for me that you don't walk out of this room not knowing anything about the role, etc. So, and that intent, that pure intent around them, is the most important thing, because I've seen recruitment in any industry done really well. I've also seen it done really poorly when the interviewer has made judgments around that person straight away. So they'll make judgments, the way they dress, the way they sit, whatever it might be. And they will be talking to them as if it was them sitting across from them. But that's the worst thing. You must unravel that person, make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe, be vulnerable yourself, and then talk about what the job is. Because if you're not
you're setting this. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but you're setting the scene, right? You're setting the scene at the start of the interview.
Absolutely. So when I do any form of coaching, and coaching is probably 60-70% of my role at the moment. So I would always contract at the beginning of the session. So I would talk about how long we're going to be in the room for. I would ask them what they would like from the session. I would talk about confidentiality. I would talk about no judgment, nothing asked them to test, and I would make it a very safe environment before we start. And then that person, because what you want that person to be as honest as they can be, for you to make then a value judgment around that, So, that someone could say, like, I get very intimidated by failure. If I feel like I'm an imposter. So let's talk through that then. So how would you feel if you hadn't done a deal for 6 months, or you didn't make a sale for 6 months, or if you were working in this part of the holiday park and you were getting poor feedback? How would you feel about that? So you can be very overt and transparent about the role, but you can only do that when I want to say their guard is down, because that sounds a little bit manipulative, but I would want their guard to naturally come down so they feel relaxed with you, and then you can get a truer interview kind of process going on so they feel better about it.
Yeah, so if I can recap, you're saying you need to set the scene at the start of the interview process so that they feel safe and they displaying the best version of themselves. And it doesn't matter what communication preference they have, but they need to feel in a safe environment, the adult relationship. And also what we previously talked about is that on day one, your first hours of working together, that communication is essential of the future relationship you're about to have.
Yeah, I think so. I often say that good neighbours need to have strong fences. So when you're working together, it's having them strong fences, them strong agreements about how the day is and how it's structured. And if you look at any successful team, from Manchester United, under Ferguson back in the day, to Barcelona, to any particularly brilliant team, they've got very strong kind of rules and regulations and ways of working in their environments. They agree. Look at, Southgate, and I'm not a football pundit by any stretch of the imagination, but you look at successful teams, the All Blacks, the most successful professional team ever, in the history of teams, and won 80% of their matches. They have a set of rules. They agree a certain set of rules that they stick to. Now, and so I would agree, the ways of working have got to be agreed by all, and an end goal, but the ways of working have got to be agreed and bought into as well. So I think when that happens, then you can have a very, very healthy relationship, and you can hold people to task, because ultimately that's what you're doing. You want them to get themselves to hold them to task, and also at some point you're going to have to hold them to task. But it was agreed, and there's no surprises.
Yeah, I really like the example that you mentioned here about the All Blacks. They had the Black Book in that they created as a team, where they had the rules of not being late. Well, actually, if a meeting starts at 10, the whole team is there at 10 to 10. that was one of the rules they had in the Black Book, written as a team. And I think, well, it worked brilliantly within the team environment. So we're talking about team environment, we're talking about communication, we're talking about how to get the team aligned. But to come back to the core theme of the communication styles, the different communication styles, and I think that you've told us now, you give us some tools how to identify what communication style can I best apply with this individual. But I can also imagine that maybe you're wrong. Not everyone is in the position to have the insights test within the team. So let's say I'm a leader, I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm realizing, okay, maybe I should invest a little bit more in my team to find out what is the best way or the preferred way to communicate with an individual. And maybe they realize they've done it wrong. How can I undo the way that I taught someone how to treat me, and how, because, well, do you understand where I'm going with my question?
I totally get that. So can you basically, what I'm hearing is, if you've got a relationship that isn't great, can you kind of reform that relationship? You absolutely can.
Exactly.
There's absolutely, I would always say, look, I've never got on with Eric in accounts or whatever. I think it's, excuse me, I think then I've never got on with Eric in accounts. And what we can then do is go, right, it's my responsibility then to go back and kind of work that one out. So there is people out there that you probably just won't, you probably won't want to go for a beer with. But if you're working with them on a daily basis, it's best to have a working relationship. So I think two things really. As a leader, if you don't know what communication style your team are as a group, you have to talk to all four energies. So you have to talk to four energies. So be detailed, show you them detailed for blue, be direct and quite quick for red, show them you care for green, and involve them for yellow. And if you do all four, you're going to kind of a bit of a coverall. But again, in a relationship that isn't great, I would say, and it takes some courage to do this without a shadow of a doubt, but you've got to ask yourself the question, I'll be working with this person for the next 2 or 3 years. Do I want to feel awkward every time I pass them in the corridor? It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Or do I take the moral high ground? Do I take the bull by the horns, grab them for a coffee and just say, look, Eric, sometimes we don't see eye to eye. What is it about me that kind of gets you, ticks you off? And, is there anything you could do to help me in that space? And take it and have the courage to create a better relationship, because ultimately that person will also identify. And there is people out there with very low emotional intelligence that don't get it. But I think it's important sometimes just to throw it out there on the table. You may not know where the conversation is going to go, but if you've got the courage, and when I say as a leader, it's not always as a leader, it's any function in a business, because I think you don't have to wait for your boss to tell you to do it or give you permission. Just do it, because it's your life, and you spend 40, 50 hours a week at work. So it's really important you have the best relationships you can. So be courageous. Be vulnerable, throw it on the table and say, look, I'm not sure if we've hit off on the right foot. Any chance we can kind of bury the hatchet and have a coffee together and just talk about how we could work going forward? You may not be hugging at the end of the day, but it doesn't matter because you've taken that positive step,
Yeah, and it's in the end a professional relationship that you hold. So what I hear you saying is, well, I'm visualizing and maybe someone who is in a recruitment position or who is in a team and feels that their manager is not communicating well to them. Example given, sometimes if I receive a long email, that's not my preferred communication style. I really, really need to focus on reading a long email where I also can think like, oh man, this could have been done in 3 bullet points, example given. So I realize now my preferred energy in an email like this is quite red. Yeah. I want it in bullet points. So if I have a manager that is not hitting the nail on the head in the communication style with me, you're actually saying I should communicate with him or her, but I can imagine that's pretty difficult to go to a manager. It's like, you know what, sometimes I receive your emails and I find it really difficult to read those emails.
So I think, so when I was answering your question earlier, I was thinking more like leader to subordinate or peer to peer. So that works well. When you're a leader to subordinate, you can definitely have that conversation. Peer to peer, is more difficult, but you can have that conversation. So let's say your boss has got a lot of red energy and you work with a lot of green energy, and he's very direct and punchy and you're not getting through. Or like you say, he's very detailed and he sends you massive, 4-page emails. Now, if you knock on his or her door and say, I want you to change your communication style, they're driven by logic, Timon. So they're in that position because of their style and because they have been successful because of their style. So why the Dolly Dickens would they want to change their style because of one piece of feedback? Now, so knocking on their door and going, hi, boss, can you change your communication style to me, is unlikely to get a great response. So what I would focus on first is the relationship. So the relationship needs to be really solid, and really it needs to be together in terms of trusting from both parties. Develop that relationship. We just take time. These relationships can be a bit meandering at times. They are time served. Develop that relationship to become a trusting relationship. And then that individual is more likely to listen to you around his or her communication style to you. They may not change, but what the point is, you can affect it over time by being patient and developing a good relationship. And that is just by being vulnerable and being honest and just being present and positive. And then you are likely to change it. If they carried on forever delivering massive 6-page emails, then you probably go, look, okay, it's not my preferred style, but this is my boss. This is the way he communicates or she communicates. I am going to have to dial up my preference, my low energy blue. I'm going to have to work on this and then pull out and extrapolate the key messages. That's what I'm going to have to do. And then you can change your style as well. So it's about, maybe ideal scenario, we meet in the middle. Not quite as ideal, we kind of move a little bit closer,
Yeah. So it might need, it takes patience from my side to sometimes, teach the other person how to best communicate with me, and over time they will learn. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
And I was working with a team from Chicago last week, and it was a main board, and the CEO right at the end of the 90-minute session just went, can't we just tell them what to do? Just tell them what to do, And we'd done insights, we'd done a whole session, and again, it was, at the moment, he just hadn't got it. It just hadn't quite clicked. So again, we finished the training session, but then I picked up with him and I got on the phone, and I said, can you just reflect on what happened at the end? And he said, oh yeah, Nick, I can't help myself sometimes. It's just, and that's it. It's learned. It's reflective practice. So the reflective practice is so powerful in terms of changing your communication style, because that's what has made him successful. So why would he change? And it's about getting you to adapt it, but it's not going flick flack. It's not going from like north to south. It's adjusting your communication style slightly.
Yeah, it is. It is, and I've heard quite a lot of interesting things. And there's one topic which is obviously quite a current theme, is but a little bit off what we just spoke about, Nick. But we're working from home a lot nowadays. We're going to change to more a hybrid kind of working environment probably. So it means a lot of people will work from home partly and will work in the office. How does this affect the communication style? Do you have an idea about this?
I think, fundamentally, I think it's one of the best things that's ever happened, because we now see people in their homes on Zoom, so we get to understand what their home life is like. So from a vulnerability point of view, our vulnerability has gone straight up. So I think it's a really good thing. So in answer to your question, I think we just have to do more of what we've already discussed. I think we have to spend a little bit more time asking people how, in the transition phase from post-COVID, I think there has to be more trust with individuals that they are going to do the job. I would say leaders need to be more aware of the basics, doing the basics brilliantly, by focusing what the rules, the ways of working and the rules are at work. Because theoretically, somebody working from home should be more productive. What should happen is they should be more efficient, because they're not spending 2 hours a day commuting or whatever it might be. And also they might be in a happier environment. But again, developing that trusting relationships, that individual says, you know what I'd like to do is do 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. Fine. So how do we know you're doing a good job? Let's look at the KPIs. Let's look at this. Let's look at that. And it's about sharing that journey, because it's still a contract of employment. You're still paying them to do something and paying them for a result. But what is it within that to get the best person, to get the best version of them out?
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, even if working from home, spend some time one-to-one with all the individuals in your team to understand actually what's going on in their head.
Yeah, there's no difference from a coaching session. It's I would say, just spending time with them. What makes them tick? Do they understand the end goal? Do they understand the rules? Do they understand the measures? Fabulous.
Okay, so what questions can I ask? Let's say, example given, I've managed a team last year as an interim manager, and the team was not performing so well. So one of the things I introduced was a coffee walk with all of them.
Yeah.
But I find it sometimes difficult to ask the right questions to find these things out. So what have you got? Maybe some example questions that I can ask if I'm a leader listening to this podcast. Like, okay, I would like to spend some more time one-to-one with my team. What questions can I ask to unfold who they are and what preferred communication style they have?
I remember Googling what is the best coaching question ever once, and I think it comes back with, so how are you? And I think it's not a bad start. So I would always start with, how are you? And how do you think we're doing? Because what you're not doing as a leader, I know, Timon, you would never do this, but I think sometimes as leaders, we assume we have all the answers. And the answer really does lie within the individual. So I'd be asking, how are you doing? And then how do you think we're doing? And then, and I don't know if it's like most industries when you came out of, moved into COVID, was, we're struggling at the moment. This could be tough. And okay, so what does good look like? So straight away you've established, how are you? I'm a bit low at the moment because I'm worried about our sales. Okay, what do you think good looks like? Right? Yeah, I agree that we should be doing 100% of budget or whatever you decide. And then at that point, I would try and ascertain, is it a skill or will issue? So if that has that person you're talking to, and I'll be overt with this and say, look, is it skill or will? Do you know how to do it? And they'll go, well, actually, I don't. I don't know how to make these cold calls, or I don't know how to sell to this part of the industry. Fabulous. Then we need to upskill you. Or is it a will issue that this individual knows how to sell, knows how to deal with these cold calls, but doesn't want to because of fear of offending someone or whatever? So then it's a will issue. So as a leader, then you can decide, is it upskilling, eye training, or is it a will issue? Is it a motivation issue? And then the conversation becomes a lot more focused around, again, like right at the beginning of this podcast, it's all about them. It's releasing them to be the best version of themselves they can be. And if you go right back to that core stage and go, right, so it's a will issue. So come on then, what would have to be different in your head for you to feel comfortable doing this? Oh, I'd probably need to be a bit more confident. I'll probably need to practice it a few times. Oh, fantastic. Well, let's look at that then. Would that enable you to do it? Yeah, I think it would. And if it's a skill issue, lack of skill, then you go, okay, what training do you need to become better at this? Do you need mentoring, or do you need to look at the best salesperson out there? So that's what I would do in that particular conversation. Because again, reflecting back to something we spoke about, it's an adult conversation. We're in this together. Yeah. Sales aren't great. How are we going to get through it? I haven't got
Wonderful.
the answers,
Yeah. Well, it's great insights that you're just giving us, I think, Nick, is that asking them these questions as well. So this is really what I like about the adult relationship that we create. It's not that I see that it's a skill issue. That's what maybe the old school leader would do, and you need to get better at these things. But you just ask them and get their involvement. I think that's also with the current generations what they would like to get. But I also hear the skill and will rings a bell to me as a situational leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. So if very simple, modeled by Ken Blanchard, the 1 minute manager. Bottom line is, it use a directional leadership style. If they've got, no skill and loads of will, much like a new starter, you'd mentor them. If they've got an increased level of skill, but their will is lowish, is average, you probably need to mentor them, put your arm around their shoulder and say, look, I know it's tough, but we're in this together. And then if they've got all the skill and no will, then that's a coaching situation. It's a bit like giving up smoking or losing weight. Everyone knows how to do it. We just don't want to stop eating those donuts, and that's a challenge for all of us, certainly for me. And then finally, you can delegate to people with high skill, high will, and that's the beauty of situational leadership. But again, looping right round, if you're going to get progressing lives everywhere, I think it's progressing the individual by thinking through their eyes, by living in their world and walking in their shoes and seeing their world from their perspective. And I had a great story recently where, and this was probably 8 months ago, where a really high performing sales individual was loving life in the office, loved it. COVID hit, lockdown, back at home, sitting in his spare room on the edge of a bed, trying to use a laptop, and his sales went off a cliff. So it wasn't even a skill issue. It was a huge motivational issue. So the business that we were working with, they sent him round an office chair. They created a small environment at home for him, and his sales went back up. But the point was that wouldn't have happened without really good, talented, insightful, intuitive leadership, about really spending time with that individual. Because, and it was great. It was great seeing their sales kind of rocketed back up because of that care and that investment of a couple of hundred euros for that individual, and they just went back up there. So
and well, I like to conclude it with, if you see it through their eyes, that's the magic. Maybe is that a good conclusion of a lot of things we spoke about today?
100%. You must look at it through their eyes. Walk in their shoes, be empathic to them. Be empathic to their world. When they first say, whether it's an interview, whatever it is, think about how they are feeling. If you think of it in that world, create a safe space, make them feel good about themselves, and then you're going to get the best from them, whether it's an interview, whether it's an established leader or a poor performing leader, a poor performing individual, doesn't matter. Always be part of them. Look through their eyes. Live in their world.
Wonderful, and that's a great way to conclude, and I think also to finish off this podcast, Nick. I could talk for hours for sure, and I would love to.
I think we're both good, Timon.
Yeah, that's maybe my preferred communication style as a yellow energy. That I want to share all the things and go off topic quite easily. And I know that you like to communicate with quite a yellow communication style as well. To conclude, maybe my last question to you, Nick, if you have to give one piece of advice to those people that are listening to this podcast to take away of today, what advice, and to progress their lives or other lives, what is one piece of advice you would like to give those listening to this podcast?
I would say the one thing I would say, or that certainly helped me the most, is positive reflection. So I would positively reflect on your interactions with other human beings. I would positively reflect on your behavior, reflect on it and think, well, okay, what could I have done 10% better? So I think positive, healthy reflection is one of the things that I would say is a bit of it could be seen as a bit of a silver bullet, so positive, healthy reflection. What's just happened? How do I feel? What could I have done 10% better? What went well? And what will I do differently next time? And the 5 questions I ask myself all the time, and I will do after this podcast.
Wonderful. Okay. What could you have done 10% better?
Probably thought of a couple of better stories.
Wonderful. I think it's perfectly in line with how I approach life as well, and also as a trainer and coach, is 1% better every day. That's what I'm striving for. One step at a time. Because what I often see is that people would like to change their lives. They've seen something, they've read something, and they want to change their way of working 180 degrees, 10 steps at a time, and they fall, and it hurts. And therefore, 1 step at a time, 1% every day, small steps.
No, it's fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Nick. I know you're a very busy man, so thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I hope to see you in real life pretty soon again, so we can talk over this topic a bit longer, one-to-one, or maybe we can record a podcast part 2. the last question. I promise you, Nick, this will be the last question. If we switch roles, Nick, and you are hosting this podcast, or you would be hosting this podcast, who would you like to interview maybe for the Progressing Lives podcast?
Wow, that's a really good question. I would probably say, wow. The thing is, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I would probably say Gareth Southgate. If I could interview anyone, it'd be Gareth Southgate, I think, at the moment, because he is on, he is hot topic at the moment. But if you look at what he's done with those young footballers during the Euros, I would probably say him. And what that was fascinating for me was the teamship that they developed within the Euros was fabulous. And we got to, we took Italy to penalties in the finals, which is incredible. But if you actually look, the key thing for me, Timon, was, and this is what I'd love to interview him about, because the way he got the team, when he subbed people off, when he was subbing players, the players weren't looking down. As they were going back to the stands, they were looking back, they were into their team, seeing what's happening. There was so strong teamship that they felt like they were playing even when they'd been subbed. And that to me was absolute world-class leadership. So I think, in answer to your question, Gareth Southgate.
Wonderful and great explanation. I would definitely listen to that podcast for sure. So thank you so much again for your time, Nick. And I believe you're going fishing, so enjoy your time off this afternoon.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.